This short video will survey the geography of the biblical world. This is the setting where the drama of the biblical narrative unfolds. It's important for us to remember that the Bible is not just a collection of abstract ideas, but it preserves a memory of a God who acts in history. This is a God who acted in a real time, in a real place, and we want to understand the setting of where those actions took place in the Bible. Now, the geographic area of the Old Testament is generally referred to as the ancient Near East, or sometimes the ancient Middle East. There are kind of three limits of the ancient Near East. You'll see the area that is known as Mesopotamia. And then there is, to the north of that, the area known as Anatolia, that is modern-day Turkey. And then, of course, we have the Nile River Valley, which is associated with Egypt. This is the broad overview of the ancient Near East. And we're just going to focus our attention as we move through this. Now, it's important to be familiar with what's known as the Fertile Crescent. The Fertile Crescent, it's just this crescent shape region. Of course, there's a lot of desert in the ancient Near East, but this is the area that was known for having relatively rich agriculture and was the location of civilizations. So you had Mesopotamia, and then on the right-hand side, and then going up Mesopotamia, and then down along the left-hand side, the area known as the Levant. And we will look at each of these in turn. But first, I want to focus on the region that we know as Mesopotamia. So the word Mesopotamia just means between the rivers. This is the land that is between the rivers. Of course, we're talking about the Euphrates River there on the left-hand side and the Tigris River on the right-hand side. This is well known as one of the cradles of civilization. The oldest cities in the world are located here in Mesopotamia. Now, I've highlighted just a few of the most prominent cities of Mesopotamia, from Ur in the south all the way to Haran in the north. Now, the history of Mesopotamia is long, it is complex, and of course, it's just going to be beyond the scope of our discussion here. But I do want to highlight just a few of the major civilizations of Mesopotamia. And this will help us to understand our Bibles a little better. So the first of these, the oldest of which, is the civilization known as the Sumerians, the Sumerian civilization. You can see approximate dates of when the civilization was around. It's in southern Mesopotamia. Very important early civilization. This is dating to a time before the biblical patriarchs. So when we say the patriarchs, we're referring to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so that's all the way back in the book of Genesis. So this is a civilization that was before even Abraham, or some people say Abraham might have overlapped with the end of the Sumerian civilization. But the reason why we want to include it in our discussion is because it was so culturally significant. And it had a very profound impact on other cultures that came after it. The Sumerians are credited with inventing writing. The oldest writing system in the world is from the Sumerians. They also developed the oldest law codes, and that was very, very significant. A lot of the stories and myths come from the time of the Sumerians, from the ancient Near East, and were preserved and remembered even by later cultures. So this is the first of the civilizations of Mesopotamia, and again note that it is a southern Mesopotamian civilization. I've highlighted a few of the major cities, Ur being the most significant. for our purposes in the Bible of those early cities. The next civilization to look at is the civilization known as Assyria. So this would be a northern Mesopotamian civilization. They were around for a very long time. You can see 2025 to 609 BCE, or around 2025 to 609 BCE. Now, of course, with that long of a history, there were many changes and developments. This particular video is not going to discuss all of those, but this is kind of the heart of where Assyria was located. In the Bible, the one that is of most immediate concern for us is what's known as the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Very significant within the historical context of the Bible. And at the height of its power, the Neo-Assyrian Empire controlled pretty much the whole of the ancient Near East. Everything from Egypt all the way to southern Mesopotamia and everything in between. They really were one of the largest empires, and actually is credited as possibly being the first true empire. That is, that they held control over multiple ethnic groups and organized them into, one governmental system. So that would be the Assyrian civilization, again, located there in the north. Of course, in biblical story, we know well the city of Nineveh from the story of Jonah. Haran, very ancient city. We know that Abram, with his father Terah, they set out from Ur and then settled in Haran. So those are a few of the civilizations, or a few of the major cities of the Assyrian civilization. So we had Sumer in the south, we have Assyria in the north, and then the last one to look at is another southern Mesopotamian civilization, just referred to here as Babylonia. Babylonia was a civilization that was around for a very long time. Now, following the Neo-Assyrian Empire, who I just mentioned, one of the periods of Assyrian history, we had the Neo-Babylonian Empire. And after the Neo-Assyrians, the Neo-Babylonian Empire also conquered pretty much the whole of the Middle East. They are very well known in biblical history for being responsible for the conquering, the destruction of Jerusalem, and specifically destroying the temple and taking the people of Israel into exile in Babylon, of course, named for the city Babylon. But you notice that it encompasses part of the earlier Sumerian civilization. The city of Ur would be part of Babylonia. This is just a little bit later of a time period, but a very ancient, very prominent civilization. So these three are the main three to know for Mesopotamia: Sumeria, the Assyrians, and the Babylonian civilizations. Sumeria and Babylonia being located in the south, and Assyria being located in northern Mesopotamia. Now, in addition to the civilizations of Mesopotamia, we also have the Egyptian civilization. Now, Egypt was a very important, long-lasting civilization of the ancient Near East. In some ways, it was different than the rest of the ancient Near East. Their language was very different. Their religious system was very different. They developed as a civilization separate from the way civilizations in Mesopotamia developed. I've highlighted a few of the major cities there, and of course, I left Jerusalem on there just to show where Jerusalem would have been in relation to Egypt. Egypt was actually known as, there was two Egypts, what was known as Lower Egypt and Upper Egypt. So Lower Egypt was lower in elevation. Upper Egypt, which is further south, would have been higher elevation. The Nile River flows from the south to the north. So that's why in the northern part is called Lower Egypt. And it was early in Egypt's history. It was during the very first dynasties that Egypt was, these lower and upper Egypts were united under Pharaoh. And so it's generally thought of, and actually the word for Egypt, Mitzrayim in Hebrew, literally means the two Egypts. So that's kind of how it's known. You had Memphis, and then very close to Memphis, you have the pyramids were located next to that, and the place we know as Giza. Further south of that, we have Amarna in Upper Egypt, along the Nile River. That was another important city and has become a location that we've discovered some very important documents from the ancient world. Now, the region that's known as Goshen, this is, there's a question mark after that. We think this is where Goshen was located, the location of where the Israelites were when they were enslaved in Egypt. We think was somewhere around here at the delta of the Nile River. Now, in between Mesopotamia and the Nile River Valley, we have the region that is known as the Levant. This is linking between those two very important geographic areas, and sometimes is referred to as a land bridge. It is connecting those two ancient and important regions. So first, it's important to understand the basic topography of the region. We'll just call Israel. It's the Levant region. There are four basic regions of topographic regions of Israel, and each of these are running north to south. We have, starting on the west side, all the way on the left, you have what's known as the coastal plain. This is a relatively flat region of the land running north and south. And then just to the west of that, we have what's called the Western Mount, or to the east of that, we have what's called the Western Mountains. These are the highlands. This is sort of the heart of Israelite civilization. And then I'm going to skip over the third one. All the way on the eastern side, we have the Eastern Plateau. This is a high region, relatively flat, but higher up. And then cutting in between the Western Mountains and the Eastern Plateau, we have the rift, the Jordan Rift. So you have the Sea of Galilee at the top, the Jordan River running south from Galilee all the way to the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea, of course, very well known as being the lowest altitude on planet Earth. The water that flows into the Dead Sea, there's no outlet for it, so the salt content is extremely high. I've never experienced it, but I understand that you cannot sink because there's so much salt in the water. It's just impossible to sink in there. Of course, nothing is living in there, from my understanding, because, again, the salt content is just so high. But this cuts like a groove through the land. It's very important to understand this basic topography of Israel. Major highways, so connecting from Egypt and the Nile River Valley up to Mesopotamia, has to cross through this land. And the way that they would cross through, they wouldn't go through the Western Mountains. That would be too difficult to have a road going through. So roads would mostly go along the coastal plain, relatively flat area that you can move more easily, or it would go south and around to the other side of the Jordan Rift and up along the Eastern Plateau. These were where the major roads were going through this region of Israel, which became very important as these major powers of the ancient world were moving through the land. Now, the land of Israel itself, I've highlighted some of the major cities. We have Jerusalem, of course, the capital of ancient Israel is located there in the highlands. Now, to be able to access Jerusalem, if you were moving through the land along the coastal plain, you would be coming along that flat region, and then you would have to go through up into the mountains to access a place like Jerusalem. And so Israel had established what were called fortified cities. Lachish is one of the most well-known. So that would be like a military stronghold, a very strong city that if you wanted to access Jerusalem, you had to go through a fortified city such as Lachish to be able to access it. And that was exactly what happened when Israel was attacked by armies such as Babylon or Assyria. If you're moving up the road from the south up to the north, right near where Mount Carmel is the valley of Megiddo. Now, Megiddo features very prominently in a number of places in the Old Testament as the location for significant military battles. It was sort of a meeting spot. It was a flat valley that you could have two armies could meet each other and to wage war against one another. The hill of Megiddo in Hebrew is called Har Megiddo, or what is rendered in the New Testament, Armageddon. Armageddon is just referring to the hill of Megiddo as this typological location for a significant battle that is going to come at the end. Moving along, there are a number of nations that are discussed in the Old Testament. Now, this is just to give you a picture of where these were located. Now, Israel, when we talk about the land of Israel, of course, the kingdom of Israel was divided. You had the southern kingdom of Judah and the northern kingdom of Israel. We get more into the history of how that happened in other videos. But just to note that Judah is located in the south, and then you have Israel just to the north of that. But they were surrounded by other regions. Now, during different periods of time, these other countries might have had more or less land under their control. But when you're reading through the Bible, just have a basic understanding of where these places were located. Philistia, the Philistines, they were located along the coastal plain, on the southern part of the coastal plain. There were 5 principal cities there, but just to know approximately where the Philistines were located. To the north of Mount Carmel, north of Israel, was the city of Tyre and the regions surrounding that. Further north of Israel, we have what's known as Aram, and they are going to be a very important player in the history of Israel. Of course, we know the story of Moab when Ruth and her husband and her children, they went to Moab because there was a famine in the land. So that would have been on the eastern side of the Jordan River, on the other side of the Dead Sea. And south of the Dead Sea is the area that is known as Edom. Now, at the height of Israel's power, under David and then under Solomon, they had control of pretty much this entire region. But at other times in Israel's history, they did not have that control. And so these are the different nations that were located there at that time. And finally, we have, of course, the Levant during Roman rule. So Rome, when they controlled this area, they had it divided into provinces, and they would install certain governors to rule over each of those provinces. But it corresponds roughly with the nations that we saw of the Levant that we saw in the previous slide. You have Judea, of course, in the south, Samaria, which is roughly corresponding to the nation of Israel. Samaria was the capital city of Israel. Idumea is Edom. So that's in the southern part. And of course, we have Galilee up in the north, which is right near where that Valley of Megiddo was. And all of these roads would cross through there. That's why it was referred to as Galilee of the nations. So this is a pretty brief overview, but hopefully just to orient you to the land of the Bible. Again, this is the setting where the events of the narrative of the Bible are unfolding, and it can help us to appreciate and understand the historical context of the Bible just by knowing the land.